Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to PMI Live, episode no less than 107. It is the final PMI Live of the year. My name is Rich Seddon, and I'll be in the facilitator's seat this afternoon. And I'm joined with where are you? You're that side or that side? I'm not sure. My good friend and colleague, Anthony Richardson, one or the other, who will be leading today's session. Anthony, great to have you with us. So before I do introductions and ask you to introduce yourself, Anthony, just a little bit of housekeeping first of all. We're delighted to see so many of you turn out on this final Friday of the month. Thank you for joining us. If you are joining us on the live streams on LinkedIn, on Facebook, or the other one, which I always forget, YouTube, there we go, or on YouTube, there is still time to jump on over to the live session. You can register at pmi.co.uk/webinars and take part in the sessions. We are using an interactive poll today, which uses the Menti platform that some of you may be familiar with. Not one we often use in PMI Live, so we're giving this a test this afternoon. Why not challenge ourselves on the final working day of the year? If you are on the live streams, you will see a delay in that. So if you do want to join them live and see the responses, please do jump into the live session. So after our session, you will have a Voice of the Customer survey. As always, we're shaping up the topics for the coming months for PMI Live, and we'd really welcome your input on those as ever. This particular one, avoid an AI trap, why artificial intelligence needs human intelligence, is based around just that. We ran this session, or Anthony ran this session at the PMI Goals to Results conference back in September of 2024. The Voice of the Customer spoke loud and clear that more was wanted on this, and many people didn't get the opportunity to attend that session. So we've asked Anthony to rerun the session today with some slight tweaks and some slightly different lenses. If you did attend the session at Goals to Results that Anthony ran, and you'll be joining us today, we'd absolutely love to hear from you regarding your reflections and your perspectives since the session back in September, just a few months ago. But how things moved on, and Anthony's going to show us a really slightly kind of terrifying / inspiring timeline later on in the presentation, which shows that this stuff is moving, as we all know, at pace. So really interested in your reflections, as we are with everyone. So if you have something to contribute, please do add your comments to the chat. Or if you've got a question you'd like us to answer, we've got time built into the agenda. It is PMI Live after all, and Anthony's desperate for as many challenging questions as possible this afternoon. He told me so himself. So Anthony, without further ado, would you like to introduce yourselves to the audience members that don't know you? And also, can you give us an idea of the kind of things you've been working on recently?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Anthony Richardson, senior consultant for PMI. Been with the organisation for a couple of years now, which has absolutely flown by. Background-wise, began my career in data analysis and a bit of software design, software development. So web development, SQL, querying databases, managing databases, that kind of thing. And my entire career really has been around kind of automation, change, improvement. The latter phases of which have been the most rewarding, because that's where I was given the structure around Six Sigma, Lean, more systematic approaches to delivering change. And then more recently, so I've actually got a really interesting challenge at the moment. Throughout my career, because I've been in and out of software development and around technology, I have seen various applications of the Agile methodology, and we had a recent webinar which was really great with Saurabh from the Agile Academy. And what I've been wrestling with recently is really specifically, how does that thinking, how does that philosophy align with our world of process improvement, Lean Six Sigma, statistical process control? How do these things work together to help us generate real improvement, but also navigate uncertainty and complexity? And that's been really, really interesting to work on.
Okay, fantastic. And I know there's several parallels that you're going to draw during the session as well, particularly around framing this whole artificial intelligence question and the improvement practitioner. So I think that's highly relevant in terms of what you just mentioned. So fantastic, thanks, Anthony. Would you like to take us through what you are going to cover today?
Yes, absolutely. So, as you said, the question that sparked a really good conversation at Goals to Results and afterwards is this question of why AI needs human intelligence. What's our place in this? We've had this. This will now be our third webinar on artificial intelligence, and that's not without reason. It's a hot topic at the moment. There have been plenty of developments, but to answer the question, if we want to know why AI needs human intelligence and what is our place now and into the future, there's three elements to it. There are three levels we need to think on. First, the technical level. So, just thinking of the technology we've got and that we are interacting with. What is it about that requires humans? What's the need for a human? And then on a practical level, even if you could solve the technological concerns, practically, where do humans need to get involved when AI is trying to help us, trying to generate something in our processes? And then the final, broadest, and I think most interesting question is the philosophical one. This is where we can think a bit more broadly, maybe look ahead into the future a bit more, and really ask ourselves, well, what is our place in this then? Now and forever. Do we want a world where we just sit back and the machines do everything for us and we all have, I guess, robot butlers and teachers, etc.? It's an interesting question, and I don't think there's an obvious answer.
Okay, so you're setting the bar high today. I think it's fair to say, certainly, well, let me try this theory out on you. The technical and practical tend to be led in that order, with technical coming first and then practical second. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it is. I mean, the technical is the first constraint. It's what technology do we have? It's kind of do not pass go, do not collect $200 if you don't have the technology that you can trust to get out of the way of as the human. But then from there, even if you do trust the machine, practically there are ways that you want to interact with it. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's the right way to have the conversation.
Okay, fantastic. Cool. Okay, over to you then, Anthony.
Okay, so let's start with the technical level. And I don't want to make this, when I say technical, you don't need a doctorate in computer science to follow this along. And in fact, before we even get into that technical level, it's worth just thinking about how we feel for a second. So I wanted to have this moment of interaction here where we asked everyone watching, how are you feeling about AI? Before we even open the technology discussion, what is your feeling right now? When we ran this at Goals to Results, again, we asked the same question, and we're looking for that mood to say, if you had to pick 2 or 3 words, what sums your mood up right now when you think of, and look in the news at all of these developments that you're seeing? You can do this practically by scanning the QR code on screen. It will take you to Menti, and you can type some words in, and we can look at the results in real time. If you can't scan, you can just use the code at the bottom, typing that in when prompted at menti.com. All very easy to use, all very intuitive. And as you come to answer the question, we should see some results popping up here.
Always breathe a sigh of relief when we see these responses starting to come in. So folks, if you didn't catch that, just hit the QR code, Anthony. Just jump back to that so people can see. Just in case anyone missed it. And so if you just scan that QR code with your phone, or you can, as Anthony said, go to menti.com, menti.com, and enter the code that you see on screen, which is also on the following screen. Thanks, Anthony.
Yeah.
Okay, so what have we got coming in then?
So it's interesting, and I can already say from what I'm seeing, this is a mirror reflection of what we saw at Goals to Results. Those 2 very large words in the center, very helpfully in being highlighted for us: excited and cautious. That juxtaposition, nervous and intrigued. Again, I pair those together. I think that's probably where we all are. How about you, Rich? Where are you? I'd be interested to know. I don't think I've asked you that.
Well, where am
directly.
I? I've just no, indeed. So where I've just put, I was trying to put intrigued, but my single-handed texting whilst I was responsible to that has resulted in intruding. So that wasn't intentional at all.
Okay.
It may have been an AI slip. I don't know. So where am I on it? It's a great question. So I am really, I think my 2 would be excited and intrigued. Probably intrigued before excited. if I was to rank them in a particular order personally. And as a business leader, that's where I am. I'm really intrigued as to the possibilities, and I tell you why, because of the opportunities for improving the value add of our staff's work and the time and their intelligence, using the artificial intelligence to enable the human intelligence to be used to its full extent. Is that making sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And some of that, often confused is automation and AI. I'm talking a bit about both, but particularly with it's the fear of the blank page, I guess, with some of the generative models. It's really, really accelerating our ability to create in our businesses, and allowing our people to spend their time adding their take, rather than just creating the boilerplate, if that makes sense, in a lot of examples. And that comes from everything from coaching sessions right through to learning content creation. I know you and I have been experimenting with several AI tools to really help learners at point of need and process improvement practitioners at point of need. Now that excites me, because if we can help people better at point of need, their implementation of their changes and the results they're capable of achieving are faster and in theory greater. So finally, it's a very long answer. You didn't ask me this in the dry run, Anthony. So now you're getting it fully.
I like the answer.
And then the second part, the final part, I would say, is something that I'm not, which is scared / I'm seeing a lot of leaders suffering from the fear of missing out. I'm absolutely not there. Maybe that's because I think we're ahead of the curve, and we've been innovating, testing, experimenting, not least yourself, and doing that from a learning point of view. I've seen several business leaders and consulting leaders frankly nervous as to what this means to their organization, and I'm afraid that if you go into it nervously from the outset, it will affect your decision making, and no one makes good decisions in a state of stress or panic.
I agree.
Hardly anyone.
Yeah, I agree, particularly about the putting to the heart of the value what you said about relieving the blank page anxiety. That's one I've benefited from a lot. But on the fear side, you said, and we can see from the word cloud, and thanks everyone for contributing, but it really does paint this picture. I think as Rich was talking there, all of these words were just perfect to be juxtaposed against what Rich was saying, and I agree with the caution. I'll just share very quickly. I had a really interesting session a week or two ago with some folks from a university group where we were talking about AI, and we were talking actually specifically about the ethics of AI. And we had this really interesting conversation where it was kind of dawning on us all the level of cultural change that's going to need to happen, where, for example, ethically, we want to be honest about what is AI generated. And we were saying it needs to over time become a cultural, almost societal norm, that there's a repulsion at being shown something and told it's human when it's AI. And you start to think that is going to happen at the level of society in order to help us use this responsibly. And I think that's where my worry is more on that's going to be an interesting journey, because changing cultures is never easy.
No, indeed. And I had a great example of that. It was either last night or this morning on a social media platform. It's actually a design feed that I follow. That was I spotted that the images it was an architecture feed actually. The images they were feeding were all AI generated, and they didn't say that anywhere, and they were claiming that these were their favorite spots that they'd seen recently. But some of the signature blips were there that you can spot. The wonky shutters on the windows, the cars that look suspiciously similar. And being something of a car geek, I spotted some of the grills were wrong on the particular years that they were claiming the cars were. But nowhere did it say that those were AI generated. And some of the images, there were about 40 images, I think, they were interspersed with real ones, photographic images. And I don't, yeah, it's what you say, ethical one. It's a really intriguing one as to how you feel. Do you feel misled about that?
Hmm.
Is it just because it's new? I asked myself yesterday that I'm
Yeah.
feeling misled about it. And then I'm thinking, I don't know if I need to be bothered about this or not. Genuinely, I don't know.
Mm. Yeah, I think we all do feel like there is going to be something fundamentally different or missing inside purely AI generated content. That's actually a good segue because I think it goes back to the philosophical question that we're going to end on today. You know, what is missed when we just hit the magic button and get what we want? Is anything missed?
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, is it good to be transparent about it? Okay. Let me go back to the slides then. I think it's time to get into this technical element. Now, again, just to be clear, the question that I want to try and answer very precisely is what is it about current technology that means human intervention is always required? So what is it about the tech that we're using? And in order to understand the tech we're using, I actually want to start by just really quickly simplifying an explanation of how human intelligence works. All right, so again, don't have to be a neuroscientist to follow this along. Very simple. We're just going to consider the brain in three major parts, and many of us have heard of these parts before. If you've done any basic study on the brain, psychology, thinking, you'll have come across this in literature. And I'm going to take it in reverse order. First, I'm going to talk about the cortex. So the cortex, sometimes called the frontal lobe, the front, this outer part of the brain, this is generally considered to be the reasoning center, the part of the brain that does the clever stuff, the real reasoned thinking, the logic. But it's more than that. We can break that cortex down into specific areas. You've got a visual cortex. It's really good at doing the visual reasoning and the seeing and the interpreting. Or you might have the motor cortex that's really good at the physical reasoning and the movement skills. But all of this it's kind of known as, again, the intelligent part of the brain. Well, maybe not the intelligent, as I said, the reasoning, part of the brain. This is all about intelligence, so I don't want to use the word intelligence to describe any one part of the brain. That would be self-defeating. Moving on then to an older structure that's within the cortex, almost the limbic system, the second area. So this is, again, if you do any basic psychology, you'll hear of it as kind of the lizard brain, or the monkey brain, or the more emotional, older, creature-like part of us. Maybe it's where our instincts come from. Structurally, inside this area, you've got things like the hippocampus, the amygdala. These are structures that control your memories and your more instinctive, emotional, fight or flight type reactions. Underneath all of that, we have the brainstem. And the only thing I want to mention about the brainstem for now is that based on the scientific evidence we have to date, whatever consciousness is, and I really want to separate this idea of consciousness from intelligence. Consciousness, which is this, are the lights on, is physically located somewhere around that brainstem, right at this deepest point. And that is a best estimate of science based on the evidence we have. And the reason for that is that consciousness is not well defined or understood scientifically. But what I do want, the reason I'm mentioning it is I want to immediately take that C word, consciousness, and push it out of the conversation. It's not what we're going to talk about. And that is sometimes conflated a little bit when you look in the news around talk about AI. All right, when we're not talking about consciousness, we just talk about raw intelligence, its ability to process information and give us a useful answer.
Okay.
So thinking about the brain then, I like to actually think of the cortex as an AI that was evolved by the limbic system. So what I mean is, imagine the limbic system is a little almost animalistic person. And again, this is a massive oversimplification, but it is a helpful one at this level of abstraction. Imagine you've got this animal-like thought process going on in the limbic system, and it says, I'm hungry. Well, the cortex is kind of like a giant AI, a chat GPT that it can ask. And rather than going and eating a rock, we've got this intelligent answer, go pick that fruit-looking thing from that tree-looking thing. And that was helpful to us. So the desires come from the limbic system, the intelligence comes from the cortex. Now, it's worth noting then, coming back to our question on why does artificial intelligence need human intelligence? The technology we are using at the moment to generate these language models and all of these different AI tools that we have are mostly based on the cortex. So when we talk about these neural networks, you know, for example, facial recognition, we're talking about a simulated, a digital system that mimics the behaviors and architecture of the neural structures, maybe in the visual cortex. And that's how we can build this machine that recognizes people in the same way that a brain can recognize people. So these neural networks, again, digital versions of neurons and their behavior, and they're specialized to perform intended tasks. Worth noting too, these are typically wrapped inside some kind of a container program, right? Some sort of a more traditional layer of if-then type coding, so that, you know, for example, if the AI generates something that looks really bad, this coding can look at it and say that contains bad keywords, try again. And we can protect the user from kind of the raw, just whatever the AI would say, which in early experiments we found was not always very helpful. So that just positions the two. And the reason I explain it this way is because if we're trying to answer this question of, well, why technologically does artificial intelligence need human intelligence? Well, because really, if everything we've said is true, we're actually best probably viewing the AI as just an extension of our cortex. It just happens to be in the cloud somewhere. But ultimately, our desires, the things that would make us ask a question, are all coming from our human limbic systems, right? They're coming from us going, we want to achieve something. I want to draw a picture, right? So then our cortex tells us, oh, you should use that new tool out there that can do that for you. And then the tool does the job sometimes far better, far quicker than we as the human individually could have. So we've got information from the real world, which AI can help us digest. You know, it can provide all sorts of insights, but fundamentally that still has to be passed through the filter of a human cortex somewhere in order for something useful to happen in the real world. And so what we would say is that AI, it doesn't have agency right now. Okay, if unless we did something else to trigger it, we could just leave something like ChatGPT running on a server somewhere, and it's never going to say, "Excuse me, I'm hungry." You know, excuse me, I want to do something. That's not what's going to happen. And I think for now, I'm quite happy that AI does not have its own digital limbic system. I think that's a conversation for a bit later in the presentation. But that's the answer. That is why AI on a technical level needs humans. One thing I will add, though, and you teed this up earlier, Rich, is this point on the high pace of change. And this isn't to scare us. It's just to have a dose of fact, a dose of reality here. I have a belief, I have a theory that any one of the things on this list, any one of the abilities that we have achieved in the AI field in 2024 could on its own be considered a tremendous breakthrough if you'd have explained it to someone 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, even last year. It would have been considered a tremendous breakthrough. And to say that I could have put more on here is an understatement. I'll call out a couple in particular. The one I've been using most recently up on the top right here is, I think, a game changer. I think it was just last week on ChatGPT, and I think on Gemini as well, a capability was enabled such that you can, for example, use your phone's camera to see the world in real time, and the AI can see and respond to the world in real time. And that's a leap. That's to quote Neil Armstrong, a giant leap from, oh, it chats to me and sounds like a human. If you just think about what must have to happen for that to be true. And as science fiction as it sounds, the bottom right one is true. If you haven't done it, I highly recommend you go and check out the news on 1X Neo. Doesn't make the news very often, but they're actually in tests of commercially viable kind of robotic bodies that are containing these generative AIs and are being trained to do tasks around houses. Again, it feels weird saying that out loud. It's been the stuff of films, but it seems like it's happening finally. So pace of change is fast.
And it's interesting with that top example, the first example you talked through, the video, the use of video and cameras in real time. For me, that's a real. These are all kind of massive leaps forward, and experimental leaps. So they're not all necessary. All these leaps are not necessarily going in the same direction. And like this arrow, which is time only, these are jumping out in all kinds of different directions, aren't they? But that one particularly in the improvement space really brought to life for me the real potential of virtual reality headsets. Couple it with that kind of technology, and now you're really cooking for particularly things in things like remote asset management, where VR headsets are really already being used to quite an advanced level, but very much on allowing someone else to see what you're seeing and perhaps some overlay on the environment in that setting. But with this kind of real time, being able to query the analytics of what the video is seeing, what the video stream is seeing, that's fascinating. I'm wondering if it's actually going to just enable me to justify my purchase of some of this equipment.
And again, anything with a visual inspection step, you think, oh, well, you're a camera away now from freeing yourself up to work on improvement.
And yes, but the spotting of abnormalities, the detection of abnormalities, I should say, is fascinating with that kind of thing.
So moving through then, keep the pace quick. Onto the practical level. This is a fairly quick one. It's a fairly straightforward answer. So even parking the basis of the technology itself and why it needs us to basically provide some agency on a practical level, even once we've engaged and we've provided that agency, we still have a big part to play in the overall journey as humans. And the first bit that I think is often overlooked is just this idea of data. If you ask anyone in AI as a discipline at the moment, what's the hot topic? It's this. It's that data is the bottleneck. Humans are here in the real world doing tasks. We're doing stuff. And that task generates data, as any green belt or black belt knows, much of which is criminally undercaptured. We're not always great at capturing the data we should. So it's not a new challenge to us in the improvement world. But particularly for the AI world, because this data is used to train and refine them, the quality of that data and how it is understood, crucially, it's not just the data itself, but how well the people who are training the AI understand what that data does in the real world, is the extent to which that AI will be helpful or not. So humans have to have that understanding, and they have to use it correctly for AI training. Otherwise, we don't even have an AI to use in the first place. And so too, it's the human's job to then understand, okay, given that then, now that I've got an AI, where in the real world can this AI provide me with benefit, provide us with benefit, coming back to the improvement conversation. So in the last webinar we did on AI, around top AI tools, we looked at it from a very specific kind of tool lens in terms of, what are people using it for and how are they getting there and what are the risks and challenges. But this now is more broadly thinking about, well, if I'm in an organization and I'm just kind of looking around at my processes and the different outcomes I'm seeing, how do I decide where it is appropriate to deploy an AI? And it's because of this point, I think, and there's a really good TED talk about this. It's this idea that AI often automates first that which you least expect. And the example given is of the weather. Because, thousands of years, we've just been a victim of whatever would happen by the weather. And more recently, as we've started to get the meteorological data, we've gotten better at predicting it. We often express annoyance when it's not quite lining up with the forecast, but the fact that we've got a forecast at all to quibble about whether or not it rained in time is just magic anyway. but it's been deemed something that we've got as far as we can, but it's a very chaotic system is the weather, so probably not much more to be done there. But actually, AI is being used there to great effect. Something that seemed completely intractable, just far too complex and nuanced. AI is really measurably accelerating and improving the power to predict, horrible hurricanes and storms, tropical events, understand the paths they're going to take. Massive strides forward that are made possible by AI. And again, thinking about in our organizations, we often try and look for the simplest thing to try and automate. That can be wise, but what we're saying here is that there's an opportunity for our intuitions to be tuned the wrong way, because it might be counterintuitive as to where you are best applying this. A real good example I can give you from an organization I've worked with in the past, pre-PMI, organization that had thousands and thousands and thousands of legal documents because they'd been through thousands of cases and claims. And after the case and claim is done, they kind of just sit there unless they're needed as a precedent. Meanwhile, we've got all these lawyers who have all of this legal information in their head, which was used to generate this. And actually, for that organization, is it worth them looking at how they can create a customer service chatbot and just configure that? Or actually, do they have a massive opportunity there? And even though it seems huge, that's where the data is.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
So the final piece is the prompting itself. And this kind of calls back to that previous section that, we start by having some sort of a goal, right? And here's where we come back to the 3-question model. We're trying to achieve something. We want to make that something very specific, something we can measure, something where we can create a testable prediction, and then we want to go away and try something. Well, the prompt comes in at that point when we're ready to try something. So long as we've really thought through those first 2 questions and we know what value we're trying to add, the human's job then is to create the best prompt they can. And there's a whole specialism emerging on this. There's some really interesting different techniques. It could form its own PMI live probably on prompt engineering to get good process outcomes. And not just the prompting itself, but the approach and the way you do the rules and the refinement. So how you engage with the output to get it to the point at which it's safe to be used with process customers. Humans need to be there, pretty much hand-holding AIs at every step along the journey, again, at least for now. So a quick summary. We have to build them, we have to train them, we have to decide where and when to deploy them, and we have to prompt them effectively and discursively, navigating all of the risks like hallucinations and the other challenges that we're all well aware of with AI right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Anthony, I can see some questions coming in. So just before you jump into the philosophy section, next, this comment here about the point you make about data is really key. If you do not understand the data context, you may end up with a conclusion that you do not understand value or use. I'd add to that, frankly, it could be worse. You could use it without understanding the context from which it's generated, and therefore make some really poor decisions. So I'd take that one step forward. Yeah. And honestly, it's one of I know you talk about these hallucinations quite a lot, and the platforms are getting better at this. But at a very practical level, I found myself reviewing some contracts recently, you mentioned some contracts, and using some of the AI summaries, and they've seemed really, really plausible. And I've tried to make a decision. Am I going to go and check this is correct? Because if I am going to go and do that, why am I bothering using the AI in the first place?
I know the exact fence you sat on, and I found myself balanced awkwardly on it myself at many occasions. For the moment, my take on that is to stay cautious for now, because the way I look at it is, right, if I go back again to what am I trying to achieve, I want the AI to speed me up. I'm not trying to cheat, I'm trying to speed up. So therefore, if I'm reading a document, there is some sense that I want some information in my brain. I don't just want a summary, otherwise they could have sent me a summary. There will be some value in how the summary is reached. What examples, what stories have they used to make that point, to really help me as a primate understand it. So my take on it is I will look at the summary first because it speeds me up. I can scan read a document, and I mean read, but at a much quicker speed when I'm truly aware of those contexts and those bullet points and the order in which they're going to come. And it psychologically for me, it feels more like if Copilot's given me a summary of 7 bullet points, I can literally pick the first one, scan through the document and validate that bullet point. And the net effect of me having done that, I think, is basically the same as me having read it, but it takes half the time. And I'm avoiding any hallucinations doing it that way. That would be my long answer, but that would be my answer.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've found, possibly just thinking about that, my own experiences, I found myself more trusting in potentially more critical less trusting in potentially more critical situations. So such as our CRM system has really great AI conversation summary where it'll read all the email threads from everyone, all the salespeople, all the consultants that have been dealing with a customer, and summarize them up. I'm not checking those. And I think it's because it's giving me a general feel for what's been going on, because it gives me in 4 or 5 bullet points. Here's all the activity with this customer in this account. And that seems okay. But the example with the legal documents, I've got, am I really going to stake and say that's the case? That's what's the summary here, and this is all okay because that's what it's spat out. Interesting.
Well, and again, we have to treat these things like people. I think I've mentioned this before in prompting advice, that if someone said, Anthony, just give me one piece of prompting advice, the best one I can give is, right, just treat it like a person. If you take nothing else away, treat it like a person, you'll get the best outcomes. But if you take that sentiment and apply it to what you just said, Rich, at what point is it acceptable to trust the AI? Well, at what point is it acceptable to trust a person and the output that they give you? Typically, that trust is built over a brief period of time, but where you do a bit of checking and you slowly step away. And the best advice for us is going to be, well, we'll have to probably apply that logic to these AI.
Yeah, exactly. So plenty of questions coming in, Anthony. I'm going to save these until the end and let you get through this section, and then we'll deal with these questions when we get there, just to let you know they are there.
Yes. So this final question, then, I'm going to start just with an image. I'll skip through the intro slide. Really, we're just asking this question: is this the future? Iron Man mowing our lawn? And yes, that is AI generated. I will admit, I did not draw this. I had an AI draw this for me. But yeah, it's a philosophical question. Could we ever picture a world where human intervention is not critical for successful AI outcomes? Now, I have actually a firm theory on this. My theory is no. And I'm going to try and explain why my theory is no. I don't think that world is coming. I do not think we want that world. The main problem for me is the alignment problem. Again, this is going to feel quite existential, but try and stick with me on this. Everything we do as biological creatures, it exists on a hierarchy of values, or is driven by a hierarchy of values, and that's been driven by millions of years, billions of years of just biological, physical realities. And more recently, even more complex values like societal norms and all of the things we have to deal with today. Right, but all of that, every day, every movement of our hand, even if we don't realize it, is being shaped by that huge training data set that stretches back eons. And so we have these stated goals, we have these actions and behaviors in our personal lives, in our organizations, as teams. It doesn't matter. When we start to overlay artificial systems that are trying to play the same game as us at the level of neurology, well, something will stand in its place. You could just say it's training data for now. And again, I will just call back to, we're not talking about consciousness, we're just talking about intelligence. We're just talking about the ability for ChatGPT, for example, to state that it has a goal. We don't need to say, is it really alive? Does it really have a need? We're just saying, as soon as it's behaving this way, as soon as it states a goal and does an action, which we can see it can do, well, then something needs to happen to make sure that there is alignment, not just between the stated goal, what it says it's going to do, and what we say we want it to do, but more fundamentally between what we want, what our values are, and therefore how these machines are trained, built, and managed. that for me needs to stay in place ad infinitum. There's no way of taking the human out of this equation without losing that ability to provide the right value back to the human over the long term. So it's a very existential, it's a very philosophical point, but this idea of goal alignment and value alignment, it's one of the biggest topics in AI research and has been since its inception. One of the most controversial, but absolutely one of the most important, just for our safety. The absurd version of this is the kind of Terminator Skynet scenario, right, where the machines just think they can get rid of us. But we don't have to go there, right? You don't have to go to anything quite so science fiction or absurd. We simply need a divergence of goals and a very capable machine before things start going very wrong for us.
Yeah, okay.
So, yeah, where do we go then? Is it to this world? I think what I'd like to do is just finish this presentation by asking a question and then reflecting on, do we think something is missing when something is AI generated? So it's just a quick experiment, again, using Menti, using the same, if I just move the slide forwards, using the same mechanism as we did before. You should now have, if you're viewing through the app or the website, the ability to vote on these 4 images. And it's an obvious question: which of them is the work of a machine? And there is a reason for this. These pictures that you're seeing, or at least 3 of these pictures, were all drawn by the same human artist, a gentleman called Steven Zapata. I will link to him and reference him in a moment. He has a TED Talk where he goes through some of this same material I'm going to show you. And he's a very talented artist, but he has this particular style. And one of the things that Steven does is he talks about the journey that he goes on and basically just how important, I'll show Steven just because I think it's nice to actually show the artist as well as the art. So the problem that he's interested in is the ethics of using AI, and he's particularly worried about, is it ethical for a machine to hoover up all of his work and be able to then instantly generate something else that looks like it? I think that's a valid concern. But there's a deeper concern on top of that just closes out for us this conversation on the philosophy of it. And that's why what I did was, I'll just have a look at the answers here. So we see most of you are going for the serpent. Okay. So I asked ChatGPT, I think it was DALL-E 3, to generate an image in the style of this image attached. So I only gave it one. I only gave it one of Steven's images and said, but make it of a serpent wrapped around a tree. So again, 10 points to Gryffindor for whoever selected that option. That's correct. But the point is, in 30 seconds, I got this. And maybe you can tell, especially if you were there at goals to results. I suspect some people were, so they already knew the answer to this question. But you can maybe tell. I think, and again, just going back to the results, it's at least generating some other answers. So it's not certain. It's not like we're all picking that. But one of the things that Steven does is he tells this story about, or he explains how every time he creates these images, he goes on he goes on a journey himself, right? He learns about the client he's drawing for. He learns about the subject matter if the client's asked for something specific. He really thinks about geometry and architecture, and sometimes he learns something new about that discipline. He goes on this great journey and has this great conversation with the customer that evolves as he's designing and building the artwork, and then culminates in the artwork. So the question I wanted to close on is something lost with the ability from our human race by just clicking buttons all the time and getting what we want? What happens to us in that world? I don't think we want that world. I think we want a world where what we've done is we've maximized the value. We've maximized those awesome journeys that humans can go on. And what we've done is we've gotten rid of the waste, like in the lean conversation of minimizing waste and maximizing value. We've gotten rid of all of those bits that are kind of cultural and societal and organizational waste. And that's how you bring this whole philosophy question right back down to the lean principles, for me, at least.
Well, it's a really interesting one. I mean, and I think it's well, inevitably it's going to be mixed, isn't it? But the point you raise there and the analogy you're using in order to illustrate what does this mean for our organizations and the work of people working in our processes, it's really zooming in. It's very similar to the automation argument, isn't it? About really zooming into the things that are value add to or improved, genuinely improved by being automated. And the things that aren't. And this, this creative process, it's a very similar one, isn't it? Because, people look at these images, and I've heard people talk about some of them, and that serpent's a great example there. There's something a bit odd about it, isn't it? I mean, it's amazing. Don't get me wrong. It's staggeringly amazing that in 30 seconds, an original piece of artwork that will never be recreated again in exactly the same way has been put together about that. But it's got its eccentricities, as you can see. There was where does that serpent's tail exactly go there behind the tree? And if that was a human artist, it probably would have been dealt with. And you certainly look at the intricacy of these ones that are around it. But for me, it's this analogy really works. It's about understanding what do we want. I think in the general sense, there's a lot of people that will take a seemingly easier option with things like this. And I think we're going to see much more of it, particularly from a cost base. That example I was talking about, feeding the social stream the architecture social stream. That is a radical cost-based changer for that organization. They're able to get more hits, more views, more monetization of images that previously they had to pay royalties on. They were capturing. They had to send photographers out to get those images, and it is there. I guess our conversations that are going on there is almost what can we get away with here. And I think we need those people that really succeed with it will have a much better answer to that question, and probably a better question over what can we get away with.
Yes, no, absolutely. It goes back to that point I was saying earlier about this is going to cause a very emotional societal change in our norms and how we perceive things. And it could even have a positive impact of us finally all starting to really appreciate what the value in things like art is. Because as we start to crave none of this generic AI stuff, and we want that magic spark, even if we can't articulate it, just having us all as a civilization realize it's important could be a positive. So, there's a number of ways this can go, but I completely agree. We're at crossroads right now, and I'm quite optimistic. I think humans do need to be involved. And I think it's exactly what you said. It's about what do we value? Like, what do we want? Again, like with lean, when we look at our processes and we say, where's the value and where's the waste? What's the value? Where's the waste? In terms of this process of life and our organizations, what do we value and how can we do more of that is the right question. And therefore, we'll always be in the conversation. Humans will always be there.
Okay. So coincidentally, as you were saying that, the Copilot prompt appeared on my screen here, warning me that we had 10 minutes left in the session, and would you like me to summarize the meeting and the key points so far? So I'm hitting yes on that, and I've asked the prompt, summarize the conversation so far. What arguments were put forward? So we'll see what that generates, and we'll share the results with everyone when it's finished doing that.
And meanwhile, we can juxtapose it then against the human-generated summary of what the human just said. So yeah, to summarize then, so the key points: in its current form, AI doesn't have agency. So on a technology level, we have to find the value we're looking to add, and then we have to trigger an AI to help us. Workarounds for that, but in principle, that's what's happening. Humans are also crucial in generating and understanding the data that's used, training them, right? And we have to oversee it because of all of the problems we talked about. But the big two at the end here being that we always want to make sure, always, no matter how much we automate things, that the AI is doing what we want it to do, the way we want it to do it, and the outcomes of what we want to see. And even if you solve all of that, it's my belief, and I think a lot of people share this, that fundamentally, philosophically, removing humans from intelligent and creative work entirely is probably bad for us. And we don't want to do that. We will never want to do that. At least not all of us.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Right. So should we get some of these questions then, Anthony? I can see you're raring to go with them. What someone asked, just a quick clarification. What do you mean by hallucination, Anthony? That you keep referencing.
Yeah, sure. So hallucination is a term that's being used in AI, in the AI field, to describe a situation where, well, so the technical definition is where an AI confidently produces an output which is obviously incorrect to the human operator. All right, so good example, the funniest example I've seen is a conversation, you can look this up online, where someone asks ChatGPT, one of the earlier versions, how many letter R's are there in strawberry? And it says something like 1. And there's this hilarious argument back and forth where this human's going, no, list out the letters, right, count. And it keeps getting it wrong very confidently, because it's not genuinely thinking about it. It's simply playing a language game with us that looks like it's thinking about it.
It's trying to interpret the language, and we find that quite a lot. I've just shared the meeting notes that were generated so far in the chat. We summarize our weekly start the week meetings that we have with the whole company stand-ups on a Monday morning using Copilot, and those have to be checked thoroughly because it can interpret the language, and it's probably a lot about how your natural flow of languages / poor use of language potentially, where it will sometimes say white is black and black is white, i.e. the decision that was made, it will say the polar opposite. The decision was made. Such as Richard did not thank Anthony for his excellent presentation on Friday afternoon, whereas actually Richard did thank Anthony for his, and you really need to pay attention to that stuff. Okay, so can you give us some examples of where you could use AI in a Lean Six Sigma improvement project, Anthony?
Yeah, I could think of a couple off the top of my head. One thing I will say, be very careful, partly for the hallucination reason, but feeding in the math, so the statistical side of Six Sigma, I would avoid. These models are getting better and better and better, but anyone who's had a good coaching call knows the rigor that we need to apply here. Just don't. Would be my personal opinion right now. I don't know if you've got a different view, Rich.
From the stats. So if those of you look at the chat there, you'll see at the bottom there are references, and the conversational transcript analysis AI platforms give you references. So if you're not sure about something, you can click on that number and see the references. I haven't seen a good one for the stats yet that does the same thing. Draw key conclusions and show me how many things are in this Excel table. I haven't seen a reliable and comforting way to say it's done that because. And that's the bit for me personally, and maybe I'm out of date because I haven't tried it for a few weeks, but it's probably been about 6 weeks since the last time I dabbled with Excel analysis, and I asked it to generate a series of tables and tell me how many of these there were in this data sample. Immediately I knew the data sample, immediately I knew it was wrong, so I was like, oh, back off, do it yourself.
That's my sense of it. So again, in a Lean Six Sigma project, avoid anything on the stat side. But let me give you something helpful then on where you could use it. I'd go back to the comment Rich made at the beginning of the call about the blank, puncturing that kind of blank canvas paralysis. If you have a bunch of people in, let's say, a workshop and you're brainstorming something, I think AI can be a valuable tool, not to offload the work to, but to help you puncture that blank canvas. So, for example, if you're struggling to come up with, if you're brainstorming some sources of variation and waste, and you struggle, you think the team's thinking might be too constrained, and AI is a great immediately responsive solution to say, look, we're having this kind of a problem, what else might we consider? And it will spit out a whole bunch of bullet points. Some will be good, some will be bad, but they will turn that creative mindset back on. You will think of something you hadn't thought of. So that would be my immediate one.
Okay, and here's on a final point here, just like to pick up this comment that's been made here. If you become reliant, so I'm paraphrasing here, if you become reliant on using things like AI to detect defects, you've missed the point in the first place that you should be preventing the defect from occurring in the first place. Now there's a safety net, isn't it? That I think we're going to see quite a lot of challenges on that front, if I'm being honest, where we will just use them as safety net and not bother making it through, because the AI error proofing in the first place, because the AI will catch it, won't it?
Yeah, could be. It depends. I guess you could reframe the question. It seemed like up to now it was a universal constant almost that quality assurance, building quality in, is the best thing to do ultimately. But in a world where there are magic beasts floating around in the clouds that just fix any errors in real time for you without you having to worry about it for the cost of minimal electricity. I still have a feeling it's a universal constant though. Something about it says to me it's the right way to go. Build it right.
Yeah, well, indeed. How can it not be? How can it not be? And plus, I mean, you touch on it there, just mentioning about the use of electricity. Yeah, there is an environmental cost to AI, a
100%.
vast environmental cost to the use of it. And there's all kinds of varying statistics out there about the amount of water that's used in the creation of one of those images that you've just seen there.
Just to keep the servers cool.
Just to keep the servers cool. Yeah. And we all know about the pressure on energy grids. That all the pressure was being predicted long before this was even vaguely conceived. So we could see some massive challenges with this kind of stuff. Absolutely huge. Anthony, would you mind sharing the last couple of slides on your screen for me, please? So folks, that hour has flown by. It's been fantastic to have you with us, and Anthony, thank you very much for that presentation. As ever, the learning never stops. You can get all of our content, whether it's our podcasts, our webinars, interviews, vodcasts, you name it, in the Knowledge Hub, all of which you'll find at pmi.co.uk at the top of the homepage. There's a link to the Knowledge Hub. And next slide, please, Anthony. Sound like Chris Whitty. There we go. So now available is our Agile Operations Leader Apprenticeship Programme. We are indescribably excited about this. For those of you in England, are able to access it via the Apprenticeship Levy, which is Level 4 Process Leader Standard. The first cohort is going live in March. This is a superb program for developing you as a team leader, a supervisor, a manager. If you're looking to make impact and you care about your talent development, we're building this program with all the best of our new Agile content, all the best of our process improvement and lean content in the context of a team leader and management program development. Really rounded, fantastic program, and available via the Levy. You will find out more on one of our information and guidance sessions, which run every Tuesday and every Thursday at the times you can see on the screen. Those are UK times. Obviously not next week, but beginning in January, from the 7th of January, will be the next IAG, which is at 13:30 UK time. And finally, Anthony, if you could jump on. Thank you very much. The next PMI Live is on January the 31st, 2025 at 1500 hours UK time. It is available to register now. Get yourself in there. We're talking about measures, and my colleague Damien Albinson will be joining us to talk about aligning KPIs and how to drive behavioural change. So all that remains from us is to say thank you so much for joining us on behalf of everyone at PMI. It is our joy and our pleasure. Thank you for another year of these things. Episode 108 coming up in January. Anthony, thank you, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Thanks all.